Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia tales. Today, Sal and I talk about the 10th Mafia hitman that Sal was close to. His name was Roy DeMeo. Roy was a made member in the Gambino crime family. Roy was under a capo by the name of Anthony Gaggi. When Roy was on the street, his main boss was Paul Castellano, and you could say Paul didn't like Roy. Sal did do some criminal business with Roy, and we do talk about it today. Roy did a lot of sick things with his crew, killing lots and lots of people. Roy was killed one night and left in the back of an ice-cold trunk full of bullets. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interviews like this. Also, please subscribe to our Patreon channel if you want to get an exclusive story about Roy DeMeo. This is just part one of this video. Me and Sal will do another segment on Roy DeMeo. He was involved in a lot of sick things. But without further ado, let's get into Roy's story. We're back, Sal. Good morning, man.
Good morning. It's a beautiful fall day, and we just came back from Cleveland, and I learned a lot about the Cleveland mob. And one of these days, we'll talk about this. But getting back to all the New York gangsters, hoodlums, mob guys, who are we going to talk about today? You did the research.
Oh, Roy DeMeo, man. There's a whole lot of...
Wow.
There's a whole...
wow.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of information on him. So we're going to do, this is part one. We'll go on to do a part two from the son and family's perspective. But today we're going to go off of all the research and all of your encounters with Roy. So, you know, he was a made man in the Gambino family. You know, he didn't want to, you know, Paul Castellano didn't want to make him at first, but, you know, he eventually worked his way over and he made it. And, you know, he did a lot of stuff. He had the Gemini Lounge that we're all familiar with, where he would do a lot of hits, a lot of murders. I mean, a lot of gross stuff went on there. So, you know, so a lot of people are pretty familiar with Roy. So where did you come into place with him? I mean, who introduced you to Roy? Who, what, when, where, and why? Let's hear it.
Well, you know what, it's interesting because you learn things, because now we have online, we got Wikipedia, you got all kinds of stuff. And when I look at, like, somebody says, oh, what's the body of work for an actor or a director? And then when I look at Wikipedia, I don't believe 100% of it, but there is a lot of information about DeMeo that I'm shaking my head. You know, who would have known that he was going to be involved with a credit union? He was going to scam them. You got to understand, a professional criminal back in the 70s could be doing all kinds of crime. And like it was in the mob in the 70s, the left didn't tell the right what was going on. And when I read about this stuff, and my name doesn't pop up on DeMeo because I didn't have anything significant, you know, to put to the government, because by the time I flipped, he was already dead. I think he got killed in 83. Mm-hmm. And I flipped, well, I left New York in 82 and flipped in 84. And I didn't have a lot to say about it because, you know, the business that I did with Roy was about stolen cars. Okay. A lot of people think, oh, he just stole cars and sent them to Kuwait, sent them to Puerto Rico, and he made money in those. Sure. But when you're in a business and you struggle to find a niche, he not only took cars and put a new ignition in and sold it, he had customers for parts. And a lot of people didn't know this. So at the same time in 78, I had a chop shop operation. Most people think you have one building, a few guys in there dismantling cars. That's not what I did. I had the grand scheme. I had 5 buildings. I had 2 big trucks, 2 of the biggest U-Haul trucks, 22-footers, would fill up 5 complete disassembled cars in there. Now, in 78, something was happening in the auto business. They shrunk the cars. When I say they shrunk the cars, if you look at a 76 Monte Carlo, it was a big car. A 76 Monte Carlo had a trunk, and we would laugh and say, you know how many bodies you could put in a trunk? A bunch of bodies. The trunk was so big, okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But in 78, the car shrunk because Lee Iacocca, who was Chrysler, decided to compete with China, and he made smaller cars. And what they did was like shrinking the candy bar. Hershey's didn't, you know, shrink the candy bar and drop the price. They shrunk the candy and raised the price. So that's what, you know, the automakers did in the United States. They shrunk the car and the price went up because we did have big inflation back in 78, 80, all through there. So my position was I got orders from body shops, from dealers. Okay, I need At times, I need a T-Bird, I need a Camaro, I need a Buick. They would give me that list. Some of the guys would give me a specific list with a great deal of specificity, which was, I want a blue Camaro with a blue top and blue interior. So I had to tell my car thieves, which was Peter Zaccaro, we talked about him, Frankie Burke, Carmine, who married Gotti's daughter, Goldie, who was with Joe Messina. I had car thieves from every family working for me. And one day I said to Charles Caniglia, hey, if you got anybody who wants parts, I'm doing, people couldn't believe it. I was doing 20, 30 cars a week, but I had bought 3 buildings in Brooklyn. So I had 2 buildings in the hot cars in Brooklyn. One was legitimate. I rented it out, big building. And then I had 2 buildings in Queens. I had 5 buildings, and I had 15 guys working for me. I had a crew, because I did love NASCAR. I had a crew that was so good, we could disassemble a Chevy faster than they could put it together in Detroit.
Damn, that quick, huh?
I had 2 guys with air compressed drills would take the wheels off, okay? They'd jack up the car, take the wheels off. Before you know it, the next thing was take the gas tank out. And 78, we didn't have a gas shortage. It happened in 79. They'd take the gas tank out. A lot of cars had a few gallons. But in a year and a half, things changed. And we had a gas shortage with lines. And every time we took the tank out, the gas tank was full.
Just full.
You got to realize in those days, 15, 20 gallons, that's 140 pounds. So I had this young kid trying to take the gas tank out. I couldn't let him do it anymore. I had to get a muscular guy to do it. I mean, that's the little things that you dealt with a chop shop. And we were chopping and chopping. So I said to Charles, you got anybody else? Sometimes I would wind up with extra cars, and I didn't want to have any extras around. I did have 2 big trucks. I could store 4, 5 cars in each truck. So he says, you know what? When you come next week, I'll have this guy come. I'll introduce you. I go, who is it? He says, a friend of mine, Roy. The following week, I went over there, and he introduced me to DeMeo. I know nothing about this guy. I don't know who he is, what he's doing, or where he comes from. So then we start talking. I go, yeah, packages. What do you want to pay per package? He said, well, if you give me 10 packages a week, I'll give you $600 a package. But normally I pay $400 to $500. Okay, you want a standing order? How many Chevys? How many T-Birds? How many Camaros? How many Oldsmobiles? How many Cadillacs? He said, doesn't matter. Just give me, I said, I can put 5 packages in my truck. I'll load the truck up, and we went to this diner where Charles hung out. It was called the Lindenwood Diner. It was on the border of Brooklyn and Queens. I said, I'll bring you the truck. I'll give you a set of keys. You pick up the truck after I drop it off, and the next day I'll go back and pick it up. It'll be empty. And I always had this habit of buying American locks. It was a big stainless steel lock, large lock. I started using them when Foxy and I did heist, and we wanted to lock something up because you couldn't break the lock. You'd have to get a torch and cut it. So I gave him the keys. I brought the first truck over. Boom, he picks up the truck. The next day I go back, and I had a beeper number for him. I didn't call him on the phone. He gave me a beeper number. So I would call, leave my number, and he would call me back if I was at a pay phone. Mm-hmm. And we'd arrange a meeting where I would tell him, okay, the truck is full. It's over there by the diner. He would find it there, have one of the guys who worked for him pick it up, take it somewhere, empty it. And I would meet him once a week, and he would pay me. He always paid me in $100 bills. It was interesting because if I was dealing with thieves and car thieves and drug dealers, I could tell what kind of business they were in. Because if a guy paid me with $100 bills, he either took the drug money and laundered it and got big bills, or he wasn't in the drug business. But if a guy gave me a whole bunch of 20s and 10s and all, I could pick it up, smell it. I could smell that it was drug money. I could smell, yeah.
With Roy's too?
No, Roy's money wasn't drug money.
No.
I dealt with other guys who was drug money.
Oh, okay.
So I never said a word to him about it because it was telltale, details of what people were doing, how he dressed. He did want guns off me, so I had gotten a few guns once in a while, sold him some guns, So this whole business went on for like a year or so. And eventually, because I was in the chop shop business, 77, 78, 79. And I got through that point where Detroit was making the smaller cars. So the thing about that was, over the years, way back, you could buy a 72 or 73 car, and for a couple of years, those parts would fit a 74, 75. But once they retooled in Detroit and made the smaller versions of the cars, there wasn't enough parts around. So there was a big demand for parts. And that's how I got to sell him a lot of parts.
So, during that time, I guess you didn't know nothing about what he was doing besides that. So you established that. So, after the fact, we learn all of this stuff. So
Right.
before we go into all the stuff he was involved with, I really want to capture more of what your encounters was with him. I mean, how did he carry himself? How did he talk? Did he come off how was he a gentleman to you, or like, what was he like?
He was low key. He was very polite, low key. And I knew where the Gemini Lounge was. He told me, because Apoli Vario also had a bar over there in that area of Canarsie.
Oh,
and I
okay.
had gone with Cataldo there a couple of times because Cataldo did business with Vario, gambling business. So once after a few months, I had mentioned to Dominick something about him. He said, let me run a wire. That was Dominick's line. Run a wire means let me ask guys in the business or even corrupt law enforcement, what do you know about this guy, Roy? At first, I didn't even know his last name, just like the guy Goldie who worked for Joe Messina. I never knew Goldie's name. It was Goldie.
Yeah, that's it. Didn't want to know nothing else.
And I knew Roy. Roy was the buyer of, I didn't know what he was doing, buyer of cars, dismantled. So Cataldo come back maybe a few weeks later and says, you got to be careful of this guy. I go, why? He's a pretty treacherous guy. I say, in what way? I thought maybe he would rip you off or something. No, I think he's clipping was the word. To clip a guy is to kill him. I think he's clipping a lot of guys, and I don't know what it's all about. It could be drugs, whatever. But he was killing people after we read about it. Shylock business. If you read into what he was doing, he was involved with a legal credit union. So he was involved with all kinds of crime. And I think the car business maybe was the basis to keep his criminal activity going. It was very steady. If you're in the drug business, the drugs dried up once in a while, and you couldn't get enough of it. So supply was important. In the car business, especially in 78, brand new style cars, you could sell that stuff every day. You could sell 10, dismantled cars, chop cars. But Roy also took batteries, which was weird to me. Nobody wanted batteries. The batteries were Delco Remy batteries. And in those days, they might have cost $28, $30, but he would give me $7 a battery. So if I was doing 30 cars a week, I got rid of 30 batteries. My other problems were I had to get rid of like engines. I didn't take the engine parts apart. I would have had a fortune if I took all the pumps and, all the parts off, starter, generator, all that. I didn't have time for that.
Yeah, you were just trying to be quick and get things in and out. Because you said, like you said, you didn't want to have any extras laying around. So Charles hooked you up with Roy.
Right.
So, with Roy as well, I mean, you would always meet him in the same spots, or where were you guys meeting?
At the diner, at the Lindenwood Diner. We never had to say where we were going to meet again. We would just meet there. I would send him a message on his beeper, and he would send me a message back on my beeper. Okay, be there at 7 or be there at 8. I'd go there. We didn't even go inside the diner. We'd pull up. He'd have a car. He always had a different car. And he would give me an envelope with the money. It would say like 10, 12 on there, 10 packages, 12. So he'd give me 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. And if he had a special order, like a Cadillac, if it was like a white interior, then I got an extra $100.
Oh, okay. So, I mean,
white interior or white top, whatever it was.
Would he always just come by himself?
By himself. Always never saw another guy with him. Not one. And I didn't bring anybody with me, never. Because that was sort of like, the agreement. Hey, we do this, you and I, that's it. Nobody knows about it. We don't bring anybody with us. I never met any of the guys that were in his life.
And none of the guys in this crew?
No.
Never in the Gemini Lounge either, right?
Didn't go there, knew where it was. He had told me in case, I don't make we might want to meet there, but I never met him there. Never. And he never came to my Corvette shop or any of my buildings.
None of the Sinatra Club either, huh?
No, Sinatra Club was long closed, in 78.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you want to, we can go into, what his early life and upbringing was to kind of give people more of an understanding. I mean, there was a whole book written off of, about Roy DeMeo. It was called The
Right.
Murder Machine, and that's the one that I had read. And, Dominick Montiglio, you heard of him. I mean, you've done a few
Yeah.
you were on a few other documentaries and stuff with him.
Sure.
He was in Roy DeMeo's crew. His uncle, Dominick's uncle, was Anthony Gaggy. Is that how you say it?
Gadget. Yeah.
Yeah, Gaggy. Okay.
Yeah.
And Dominic ended up becoming an informant against that whole crew, and this is how they got a lot of their information for that book. I mean, this
Right.
book was huge, and there's so much stuff in it. So he really helped inspire and did do that. But I mean, that's how he got his in with Roy. And so, from what I read in that book, was that Roy grew up in an apartment building 2 rooms down from Joe Profaci's family. Roy's dad was always saying, "Don't go over there. There's gangsters inside there. Stay away from there."
Right.
But, obviously he didn't listen, and he got, I think that was his kind of first little encounter with that
Yeah.
whole mafia life. And, he would, Roy as well, when he was growing up, he'd get in a lot
Yeah.
of fights in school. He had great reports with his teachers, though, is what the weird thing was. I mean, they said he had good grades and perfect attendance. And I think he got his first job when he was in high school. He was like a delivery boy. And again, he was a great worker. And
I
so
think
that,
it said that he was a butcher.
oh, a butcher in the beginning. Yeah,
He
I guess.
was an apprentice butcher in an uncle's butcher shop.
Yeah, on here it shows, he was a delivery boy, but
If you
maybe
read
that was
about
a
it,
high school
he
job.
was taught how to butcher.
Yeah.
So I
And
mean,
that
I
that
think
too, yeah, I read in like a book
yeah,
and movies and stuff too that
yeah,
that was his job, being a butcher and stuff.
yeah,
So that's where he really did. We'll get into that here soon, but I'm just trying to give a little background on what
yeah.
else was going on in his life that kind of probably would have groomed him to be like this. But
Well, let
you
me
know,
tell you one thing about Italian families way back.
go
If they
ahead.
were straight Italian families, like his parents told him, don't go over there where those mobsters are, right? When I met with David Chase 2 years before they did Sopranos, I asked him, what was it that initiated your idea about writing about the mafia life? He said, when I was young, because he grew up in New Jersey, my family said, don't go across those tracks. There's Italians over there, and they're not the best Italians in the world. I mean, because David Chase, he was Italian. People thought that was his name, Chase. I think it was Cesano or something like that. So
Oh,
what they told him was, don't go over there. And what do you think he did?
went right over there.
To look and see what was going on. What do you expect a teenager to do? So that's a
Exactly.
teenager. So that's how he got his ideas originally for the first, maybe the original maybe presentation of a mafia story. And I had
Right.
asked him that. So, but there was a lot he didn't know, and I gave him that information. So with DeMeo, his family saying, "Don't go over there," that's what he did, because how could you not be impressed when you see, when you see Bronx Tale, guy with a fancy suit, a pinky ring, a roll full of money, you're gonna get sucked in.
And then the parents, not, being straight, not having a
Right,
lot of money, struggling.
right,
And
right,
that's exactly what the case was with Roy too. Because
right.
after that, his father had died. His brother and father died. Like, his brother went off to the war and he was killed. And this really, destroyed their family, made a really bad impact. And then his father died. He had a heart attack, and his mother and Roy's brother, they went to Italy. So Roy was kind of alone, and he started doing loan sharking. He would loan out money and collect it, and that's kind of how he got. That was just like his first introduction to crime. But then by the age of 22, Roy never worked a legitimate job again. He had so much money on the street with selling cars. Like, that's exactly where you were involved with it.
Right.
And he would make his relationships as well with business owners to put him on their payroll as to collect taxes. So because he knew
Yeah.
you couldn't avoid paying taxes.
Right.
Obviously, Al Capone, if they can't get you for anything else, they're going to get you for that if you're
Right.
not smart about that. So he eventually started kicking up money to Anthony, I believe, or Nino.
Nino
Nino.
Gadji.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's like a nickname, right? That was his
Right.
nickname.
Yeah. Nino
Okay.
is for Anthony. Yeah.
Yeah, and because Roy wanted to become a made guy, and even before he even was getting involved with the Gambinos as much as he did, in this book they said that he was proposed to be a made guy in the Lucchese family.
Right, right. And
So
that was over in that Canarsie area.
yeah,
A lot of Lucchese's, because Vario had a bar called Gefkin's Bar. And
mhm,
I had stopped there with Cataldo a few times because Cataldo did cross gambling business with Vario. A lot of the mob guys he had businesses with, like, sometimes you'd have to hedge off a big bet. He
mhm,
would call two or three different guys. Hey, I got too much on the Giants. Can you take some of this bet? So, because the key thing about gambling business was to get, equal money from one team to the other. And that way you could never lose any money. You just pick up the vig on
yeah.
gambling. So Cataldo knew all kinds of, family guys that were doing gambling business.
Yeah, so I guess that just depending on the area he was at, I mean, he must have been growing up around the Lucchese's and stuff, and maybe
Right,
that was where that came in with
right,
Vario and Vario's underlings and stuff. So, Roy, he built a big house and stuff as while he was doing these criminal acts, and he had a top notch security system and everything, and it was reported his neighbors thought he was a very nice guy, didn't
right,
have nothing to didn't cause any trouble in the neighborhood until later. And Roy's first murder was there was a guy they were extorting, and he was going to start cooperating with the feds. So Anthony told Roy that this would boost him in the eyes of the Gambino family. So Roy did it, and he even told the younger hang around guys that after you do murder, anything is possible and you can do anything.
right.
So I mean that was his start into getting into all this other stuff, because he didn't just start doing that right away. There
And I,
was
and I noticed the guys that were around him, with the Gemini crew. There was the Rosenberg. There was different names. They weren't all Italians.
there's a
So,
Jewish kid, yeah, like you said,
yeah.
Chris.
And they killed the guy, and they killed the guy's girlfriend. I mean, once they got started like that, there was no limits,
Mm-mm.
because they just killed and they disposed of the bodies. I mean, yeah, he was involved with Charles Caniglia. And I got to tell you, Charles had a piece of the junkyard
Mm-mm.
there on Fountain Avenue, and only a mile away was the Fountain Avenue City dump. So they would dump stuff over there. And if you read about, Roy DeMeo, he got to dump bodies and body parts at the Fountain Avenue dump.
Damn, man.
Everybody knew about the dump. And
Yeah.
eventually they cleared it all out and made a city park out of it. I don't know how many bodies they found. I think the city was reluctant. Look, the city was very reluctant to expose the two mafia cops,
Oh yeah.
Eppolito and Caracappa.
Yeah.
And eventually they did expose them. And eventually they paid their families, I don't know how much, 11, $12 million, because they found out they were so corrupt they were killing
Yeah.
with the Casso guy.
Yeah.
Gas
Lucchese
pipe.
family. Yep.
So I think Roy might have been involved with some of them too. Who knows?
Could have. I
Guys
mean,
do all kinds of business with other crews. Once they know there's a crew there made members, you think you're covered. Nobody could have ever envisioned how many guys would flip in the 80s, the late 80s and 90s. And when the 90s came, I mean, remember, Henry was one of the early guys who publicly flipped. But
yeah.
then you had guys that were working undercover that were shocking. Guys
Mhm.
like Scarpa. I mean, these guys were cold-blooded killers, and they were playing both ends.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of amazing. Even the guy that I learned about in Cleveland, this guy Danny Green.
yeah.
I mean, that was a big deal in Cleveland, but he was a mob guy that was working both sides, and nobody knew it for the longest time. So, like The Departed, you see something that Scorsese did, the movie,
Mhm.
and it was all accurate. Cops were working both sides, criminals were working both sides, Whitey Bulger. And I don't know all that Roy DeMeo was doing, but he was fully connected. And once he got involved with Castellano, I think Castellano was stuck with him.
Yep. And that's what I can go into as well, is like Paul didn't want to make Roy in the beginning. He did not
Right.
want him. He said he was wild. He was just, just too crazy. He knew the stuff that he was involved with, and he would eventually work his way up to being a made guy, but I believe that Paul, he became the boss after Carlo Gambino had passed away. And then Roy wanted to become a made man, but Paul wouldn't let that happen because Paul said Roy's businesses were unpredictable. I
Right.
believe he was involved with selling dirty porn or helping
Yeah.
distribute that kind of stuff, and he
He did ask me about it, because one of the things about the weird chop shop business, you're getting 30, 40, 50 cars a week. So the guys who work for me, I was there every morning. One of the things, I had 8 or 10 guys working in each location. Don't touch the trunk, I would say. I would get there and they'd get the lock pull and they'd open the trunk. And the stuff that we found in people's trunks were amazing. We found guns, we found pills. And Roy said to me, I know you're getting a lot of cars, and if you find any porn, I want to buy it. So a couple of times I gave him a box. I didn't want to sell it. I never liked pornography. When I met my wife, she says, "You don't like pornography? Oh, men like pornography." I go, "No, I don't like it. I would never look at it. It's like, vicariously looking at women. I had more women on accident than men had on purpose when I was young. So why would I look at porn?" But, Roy wanted the porn or whatever, I gave to him. I found some guns. We sold the guns to him. I mean, I'd find everything you can imagine in the trunk of a car. I gave away more golf clubs, sets of golf clubs, than I knew.
Damn, man.
Every 3 or 4 cars, there was a set of golf clubs there and a bowling ball.
Just a bunch of sports shit.
Yeah, that's what people leave in the trunk.
Yeah. No, I mean, he was involved with, doing, like you said, the credit card scams,
Yeah.
again, the porn business. And apparently he was selling cocaine out of the Gemini as well, is what they said in that book. And he would also fund drop operations, drug, just doing, drug
Yeah.
businesses, funding them and stuff. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that is accurate or not. I mean, like I said, I just read it. I mean, I don't, like you said, you smelled that money and you
Yeah.
didn't smell no drugs on it, but he could have been
But
funding it.
yeah, Charles was involved in all kinds of things. What him and Charles did, I have no clue. I
Right.
have no clue. I'm telling you, my business was single filed hot cars. And that was it. And I had other guys I did business with. I had guys who brought me credit cards every week. I
Mhm.
had guys who brought me stolen merchandise every week. I had guys I could buy guns off. I had guys that would bring me tips like Jimmy Burke had. We called them tipsters. Hey, you want
Mhm.
to rob this truck? It's full of such and such. But, after Foxy checked out and got killed by Tommy, I wasn't interested in hijacking a truck anymore. I no longer did any hijackings after Foxy was killed. Didn't do them.
Just done after that point.
Done with it. Done.
Well, there was another incident too that I wanted to talk about from the book. Is that there was a chapter called "The Night of the Knives," and the Night of the Knives was what they called it was Roy and his crew, Chris, Joey, and Anthony, and another guy named Henry that was involved with their crew, killed a man named Andrew who owed them money,
Hmm.
and they took him to a meat shop and dismembered him. And the way that then after that they threw the body parts into trash cans, and a homeless guy found him,
Oh,
and he called the police. And Judy was a woman that was involved with setting this Andrew guy up, and what they had her do was play that she was liking him and wanting to do stuff with her, and really she just lured them to having them killed, which she didn't know that they were going to do. She thought she was just going to they were just going to rough him up, and they did not do that. And so Judy, she became, I believe, an informant against them, and they just discredit her, and they just didn't want to believe anything she had to say. But she was really traumatized by that whole event, is what it sounded like in the book. So that was another.
what became of her?
She got out of there. I think after that I think she ended up living for a while. I don't think they ever did take her out, or they might have tried to, but I don't think they ever were able to. I think it might have been in the book, but
Yeah,
you know,
sad. Yeah, there was no end of crime for that guy. I mean, he was so deep. I have a feeling, that he had all these lines of criminal activities, and it was complicated because you start fires when you're doing crime, and then every once in a while you got to put the fire out. In my
mhm,
case, I went from one biz to another biz. One of the businesses I didn't tell you about was interesting because in 79, in the summer of 79, we had a gas shortage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was getting these 5-gallon cans, filling up those gas cans from stolen cars. Then when the gas shortage came, I cut down and stopped the chop shop. But I had this idea about gas because in New York, the gasoline stations were closing. They wouldn't stay open all day because they'd run out of gas, and they didn't want their pumps to be down to the dirt in the tank, so they'd leave some gas in there. In the middle of the night, they'd get a delivery. So one of the things I did, I thought was fun, was I got a couple of what they call fuel transfer pumps. Use them on farms, and I put them inside one of these big trucks with a couple of big 500-gallon oil tanks where you had in your house, you had an oil delivery. And then we would go drive over the top of the gas station, push this hose down, and then we would suck up the gas from a gas station, then go to another gas station. By the end, gallons of gas inside a big truck, then I'd have to sell the gas. But there was a big demand for the gas because the gas went from 35 cents, 36 cents a gallon to like 80 cents a gallon in 1979, 80, because we had like 18% interest inflation.
All that, yeah.
So I was selling stolen gas, and Roy DeMeo found out about it. He said, "That's a pretty clever business. What are you going to do with those trucks?" Because I had 2 big trucks with tanks in them.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "I'm going to get out of that business. I'm going to go into the gold business in 78, 79." I said. So I had gotten a little store, and then we'll talk about what happened around 80 when I was out of the car business, when he finally did come and visit me.
Okay. Well, 2 more hits I was going to bring up was Dominick Montiglio. He had recalled going on a hit with, Roy. They went on a hit with him and Anthony Gadji. Gadji, am I saying that right? Well, they went and took out a man, in front of all kinds of people while he was getting into his car. They did this while they were actually attending Dominick's daughter's birthday. So they were at this birthday and they left and they came back and just nothing happened. But they went and took out a guy. Another one I read as well was that Roy was in Florida with another Gambino guy, and they were in a hotel room chopping up a body, and they left it all there because they got spooked and thought that someone was coming.
Really?
And then the maid that came in there, she needed mental help after that.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that'd be a horrible thing to come in and see. So like, what do they call it? Psychiatrist help. I mean, but for him, just normal. There's nothing to these guys. It's just like, oh well, just another day. I mean, they really, destroyed that woman's.
That's how casual they were about murder.
Yeah, I mean, it is insane. And as well, Roy did become a made guy. I mean, he, like I said, he was 37 years old, and he was told though when he was made that he would never become a capo because of his family, where they were from in Italy. But yet John Gotti was from the same area, his family and his roots, and he was becoming a capo.
Wow.
And so that was something that rubbed him wrong. And, so that's another reason why him and Paul had those arguments. Not arguments, because obviously he ain't going to argue with the boss like that, but he didn't like him.
But he did report to Castellano. That's what I read.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a whole latter part of his life, the last few years. We probably should talk about that in our next episode, and how, Gotti looked at him, and Angelo looked at him, and Gene Gotti looked at him. They looked at him like, this guy is really a raving lunatic. I mean, a madman who's a mass killer. And so when the mob, aficionados, mob people who like to listen to these stories, term this, the thing is, oh, he was just a killer. He wasn't he was a serial killer who was a sick man, but he didn't act that way. I mean, he looked about as normal as you could. He looked like a school teacher, as far as I was concerned.
Well, when he came to visit you, you wanted to talk about that in this episode?
Well, I think after we ended the car business, when we do the next episode, I'll talk about how I had follow-up meetings with him.
Okay.
And then, because he did once pitch me on drugs, and I Absolutely. No, I won't do that. I never did that because I wouldn't let, I mean, I had to tell Cataldo. He asked me if I was interested. I go, oh, no, no, I'm not interested. Stolen cars, stolen jewelry. And that was it. I turned him down on that because Cataldo didn't want anybody knowing we had a long-term drug business.
Damn. So he did actually approach you
He
for
mentioned,
getting
he
involved.
mentioned it. Yeah, he mentioned it. Yeah.
Well, what kind? Just like heroin, or
I
did he
didn't
say
even I didn't
didn't
even
want
go
to know?
into it. Oh, I don't want any interest. I don't have any interest in the powder. I would say I don't want to have any interest in the powder yet. I was dealing heroin at that point.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. And, in part two as well, just to give people a little background, we'll
Yeah,
cover the life of Albert DeMeo, Roy DeMeo's son, that had written the whole book about his life. And I think
yeah,
it'll be good that because Sal wrote a book about the sins of the father, was what was his name of his book. And we can kind of compare and take some stuff out from Albert's book because he wrote it about Roy. And then Sal wrote a book about what it did to his family, and his sons
right,
gave their
right.
their 2 cents into what they went through. So we'll
Yeah,
cover that. We'll cover the later life of Roy and a bunch of other murders and stuff that he was involved with,
yeah,
and what ultimately how he ended up dying. We'll talk about that too. A lot of people probably already know, but Sal will give his sense on that. And I mean, anything else, Sal, before we close on this?
no, I think I'll make some little mental notes about what happened at the end. I was already moving into the jewelry business and in 79, 80, and there was the gas shortage, and he was deep into the cars then because you'd have to, explain what exactly happened in New York in the summer of 79, 80. And there's a lot of people that remember that, but most people aren't familiar with it. I mean,
Hmm.
you had gasoline lines at gas stations.
Gasoline's line,
Yeah,
yeah.
we had two gas shortages. One was in the early part of 72 or three. I'm not sure. It might have been three. And then 79, we had another one that was popular, gasoline shortage. And you had to wait in line to get gas. Of course, the mob guys, we never had to wait for anything. We always had to figure out how to get, the best seats at restaurants, the best tickets at baseball games. We always had contacts and connections for things. So
Yeah. Well, with something that we always bring up now with our shows is like what is something that people can learn from what Roy did?
well, I think when I look back at a guy's life and stand back thinking, oh, wow, he got involved with a little bit of crime and it escalated. Then, like Dave Icavetti, the old capo, told me, don't don't murder anybody. Not that I couldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. He says, because once you pull the trigger, you can't take it back. I
Mhm.
think a guy like DeMeo, and I don't know if he was using drugs, got so deeply entrenched in all that he was doing, they couldn't stop murdering. And he had a group of people that he taught. I mean, if you look at the two guys that got life, I think it was Tester and Center.
Mhm.
These guys are now like almost 70 years old. They're spending the rest of their life in jail for what? To follow a madman and kill with him. Because DeMeo was probably, I want to say 20, 25 years older than those young guys who he taught how to murder.
Yeah. So they looked up to him.
They ruined their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a terrible life and a terrible way to go
Yeah.
through. I mean, you've seen how he when he was coming up, he wasn't like that. When he was a young kid, this teacher said he was good. I mean, yeah, he got into some fights, but that's kid stuff. So back then, especially, that's different.
Yeah.
But it's terrible that you can just slowly get into a life of crime and let it totally consume you. I
Yeah.
mean, his parents weren't involved with that. It just
Right.
I think it's about what area a lot of these guys grow up in and where they're
Yeah.
from, and that's where a lot of it comes. Well, a lot of it seems to be the environment, who was
Very
around.
sad when I think of a guy's life because he never appeared that he was a vicious, personality. He didn't act that way. He was really a gentleman. And the other side of him was he was a psychopath.
Yeah, and you never got to see that side, luckily. But
But
like I always tell you when we do these hitmans, like he could have easily killed you. Maybe he wanted to not pay you one time, or some shit. You know what I mean? It could have been
yeah,
anything, and that easily you could have been one of them. Chopped up or something. I don't know. I'm just saying. I mean,
yeah,
it's not far
strange,
fetched.
strange life. But we'll do a second part, and I think I have more details for the next version of the DeMeo character.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. So we'll just wrap up on that. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. We'll be doing part 2. That wraps up part 1 of Roy DeMeo. Roy is another example of someone who got wrapped up in the criminal life and it absolutely consumed him whole. He had a horrible ending in his life as well. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel if you want to get exclusive videos over there. YouTube is sensitive, so we do put stuff on Patreon that doesn't get took down. If you want to buy a copy of Sal's book, The Sinatra Club, that'll be in the video description below, as well as the Dinner with the Mobster card, the Sinatra Club movie ticket, and the Sinatra Club playing cards. Those will all be in the video description again, and thank you again so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.